The harsh morning sun beat down on the dusty platform of St. Joe, Missouri's train station, as Daisy Kennedy clutched her valise with white knuckles, squinting into the distance for any sign of the man who was supposed to meet her 3 days ago. 3 days of waiting, of sitting in the small station with nothing but her trunk of possessions, a worn letter promising marriage, and the pitying glances of the station master, who had begun to suspect, as she did, that no one was coming at all. It was May 1875, and Daisy had traveled over 1,000 miles from Boston with the promise of a new life awaiting her. At 23, she had answered an advertisement in the matrimonial news from a cattle rancher seeking a wife. After 6 months of correspondence with Colton Vaughn, she had agreed to come west, hoping to escape the memories of the influenza epidemic that had claimed her parents and younger sister. "Miss Kennedy," the station master approached, his weathered face creased with concern. "The boarding house has a room available if you'd like me to help with your trunk. It's not seemly for a lady to wait alone much longer." Daisy straightened her back, though fatigue weighed heavily on her shoulders. "Thank you, Mr. Simmons, but I'll wait until noon." He promised he would come. The station master nodded, unconvinced. "As you wish, miss. But consider it, St. Joe isn't the place for a woman alone." As he walked away, Daisy unfolded the letter again, tracing the firm handwriting with her fingertip. Colton Vaughn had described his ranch 15 miles outside town, the house he had built with his own hands, and how he needed a wife to make it a home. His words had seemed sincere, his intentions honorable. What had happened to prevent him from meeting her? The morning hours crawled by. Daisy watched as families reunited, business travelers departed, and the platform gradually emptied until she was once again alone with her thoughts and growing fears. Boston seemed impossibly far away now, and her meager savings wouldn't cover a return ticket. Just as the noon whistle blew at the nearby mill, dust rose on the road leading to the station. A rider appeared, pushing his horse hard. Daisy stood, shielding her eyes against the sun. The man pulled his exhausted horse to a stop and dismounted in one fluid motion, his spurs jingling as his boots hit the ground. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a face bronzed by the sun and creased with worry. His clothes were trail-worn and dusty, but even at a distance, Daisy recognized him from the small tintype he had sent Colton Vaughn. He spotted her immediately, removing his hat to reveal dark hair streaked with premature silver at the temples. His eyes, the color of a summer storm, locked with hers as he strode across the platform. "Miss Kennedy," he said, his voice deep and rough with fatigue, "I'm sorry I'm late for you." The simple statement hung in the air between them, inadequate yet somehow encompassing the weight of the 3 days she had waited alone. "Mr. Vaughn," she acknowledged, her voice steadier than she felt, "I was beginning to think you had changed your mind." "Never," he replied, a flash of intensity crossing his features. "There was trouble," he stopped himself, glancing around the platform. "I'll explain everything, but not here. Are you still willing to come with me?" Daisy hesitated. The proper response would be indignation, perhaps even refusal, but something in his eyes, exhaustion, relief, and what appeared to be genuine regret made her reconsider. "I've come this far, Mr. Vaughn. I suppose I should at least hear your explanation." The tension in his shoulders eased slightly. "Thank you." He looked at her trunk. "Is this all your belongings?" "Yes, not much, I'm afraid. It's enough." He secured her trunk to his horse, then turned back to her. "I've arranged for us to stay at the hotel tonight. You must be exhausted and the ranch is too far to reach before dark." He hesitated. "I know this isn't proper, but I'll get separate rooms. Tomorrow, if you're still willing, we can be married by the justice of the peace before heading home." Home. The word sounded foreign yet enticing. Daisy nodded, her practicality overcoming her reservations. That would be acceptable. As they walked toward the hotel, Daisy stealing glances at the man who was to be her husband, she couldn't help but wonder what trouble had delayed him and if she was making the right decision in staying. But something told her there was more to Colton Vaughn than met the eye, and despite everything, she was curious to discover what it might be. The Grand Hotel of St. Joe was far from grand. but after 3 days at the train station, the modest establishment seemed luxurious to Daisy. Colton secured their rooms adjacent but separate, as promised, and arranged for her trunk to be brought up. In the small dining room, over a simple meal of beef stew and fresh bread, he finally began to explain. 3 days ago, when I should have been here waiting for you, I was trapped in a canyon 20 miles south. His hands, large and calloused, turned the coffee cup absently. I was bringing a herd of cattle back from Sedalia when a flash flood hit. Lost 6 head, but worse, the trail was washed out. Took me 2 days to find a way around and another to get back here. You couldn't have sent word? Daisy asked, trying to keep accusation from her tone. Colton shook his head. Nearest telegraph was in the direction I was trying to go. I thought about sending one of my men, but they were needed to keep the herd together. His eyes met hers directly. I know it's no excuse. I gave you my word I'd be here, and I failed. There was something disarming about his straightforward admission. No flowery apologies, just the plain truth. It must have been frightening, she offered, surprising herself with her sympathy. Wasn't my first flood, he replied, but a shadow crossed his face. Lost a good man 2 years back to one, young fellow not much older than you. Daisy looked down at her plate. I'm sorry. Life out here isn't like Boston, Colton said, not unkindly. It's beautiful, but it's harsh. That's why I was honest in my letters. I need a wife who understands what she's getting into. And do you think I don't? Daisy challenged, raising her chin. For the first time, a slight smile touched his lips. I think you're braver than most, traveling alone, waiting 3 days without knowing if I was coming, but bravery and understanding are different things. I've faced my share of hardships, Mr. Vaughn. Colton, he corrected gently. If we're to be married tomorrow, you might as well use my name. Colton, she repeated, the name feeling intimate on her tongue. My point is, I didn't come west expecting an easy life. I came seeking a purpose, a place to belong. He studied her for a long moment. And what if you find you don't belong here after all? It was a fair question, one she had asked herself during those long hours of waiting. Then I will have tried, which is better than wondering what might have been. Colton nodded slowly. Fair enough. He hesitated, then reached into his vest pocket, withdrawing a small package wrapped in cloth. I brought this. It's not much, but Daisy unwrapped it carefully to reveal a simple gold band. A wedding ring, my mother's, he said quietly, if you'll still have me as a husband. The question hung between them, weighted with more significance than when he had first proposed by letter. Then, they had been strangers exchanging words on paper. Now they were two people face to face, with the reality of their arrangement impossible to ignore. I came to marry you, and I still intend to, Daisy said finally. But I think we should be honest with each other. This isn't a love match, not yet. It's a partnership, and I expect to be treated as such. Colton seemed surprised by her directness, but not displeased. A partnership, he agreed. With respect on both sides, and patience, she added, we're strangers still in many ways. Time will remedy that, he stood, offering her his hand. Get some rest, Daisy. Tomorrow will be a long day. As she lay in the unfamiliar bed that night, listening to the sounds of the frontier town, Daisy thought about the man in the next room. He wasn't what she had expected, more weathered, more direct, carrying a gravity she hadn't sensed in his letters. Yet there was something compelling about him, a steadiness that reassured her despite the inauspicious beginning. Tomorrow she would become Mrs. Colton Vaughn, mail-order bride from Boston, new wife of a cattle rancher she barely knew. It wasn't the romantic tale she had dreamed of as a young girl, but perhaps it could still become a story worth telling. Morning brought clear skies and a fresh determination. Daisy donned her best dress, a deep blue wool that brought out the color of her eyes, and arranged her light brown hair in a simple but elegant style. There would be no family to witness her marriage, no church ceremony with flowers and music. Just a legal transaction at the justice of the peace, with strangers as witnesses. Colton knocked at her door promptly at 9, dressed in clean clothes that, while still frontier practical, showed an effort to appear respectable. He had trimmed his beard and slicked back his hair, and when his eyes took in her appearance, a genuine appreciation flickered there. You look beautiful, he said simply. Thank you. She noticed he had a small bundle tucked under his arm. What's that? A gift, he replied, seeming almost embarrassed as he handed it to her. Noticed you didn't have a proper coat for winter. It gets bitter cold on the prairie. Daisy unfolded a lady's riding coat made of heavy wool, lined with soft flannel, practical but well crafted. I asked the mercantile owner's wife to help choose it, Colton explained. If it doesn't fit, we can exchange it. The thoughtfulness of the gesture touched her. It's perfect, thank you. They walked to the justice's office in companionable silence, the morning bustle of St. Joe surrounding them. Merchants opened their shops, wagon drivers called to their teams, and children raced to the schoolhouse. Normal life, Daisy thought, wondering if this place would ever feel like home. The ceremony itself was brief and businesslike. The justice, a bald man with spectacles perched on his nose, recited the legal words while his wife and a clerk served as witnesses. Colton's hand was steady as he slid his mother's ring onto Daisy's finger, and his voice didn't waver as he made his vows. When instructed to kiss the bride, he placed a chaste, gentle kiss on her lips, their first physical contact beyond a handshake. Mrs. Vaughn, he said afterward, offering his arm. The name sounded foreign to her ears. It will take some getting used to, she admitted as they emerged into the sunlight. For both of us, he agreed. They collected their things from the hotel and made their way to the livery stable where Colton had left his wagon. He had purchased supplies while Daisy was preparing for the ceremony: flour, sugar, coffee, and other staples she would need to keep house. The ranch is about 3 hours' ride, he explained as he helped her onto the wagon seat. We'll be home before sundown. Home. There was that word again, loaded with promise and uncertainty. As they left St. Joe behind, the landscape opened before them, rolling prairie dotted with wildflowers, stands of cottonwood trees marking the courses of creeks, and in the distance, a line of low hills. It was beautiful in its vastness, so different from the cramped streets of Boston. How long have you been in Missouri? Daisy asked, breaking a long silence. Came after the war, Colton replied. Served with the Union cavalry, didn't have much to go back to in Pennsylvania, so I headed west. Worked as a cowhand for 5 years, saved every penny, then bought my land when prices dropped in '69. You fought in the war. The revelation surprised her. He would have been young, perhaps only 18 or 19 when the conflict began. 4 years, he confirmed, his eyes fixed on the horizon. Saw things no man should see, but that's behind me now. His tone discouraged further questions, but Daisy filed the information away. It explained something about him: the watchfulness, the way he carried himself, perhaps even the silver in his hair despite being only in his mid-30s. What about you? He asked, changing the subject. Your letters mentioned losing your family, but not much else. Daisy smoothed her skirt, gathering her thoughts. My father was a bookkeeper for a shipping company. We lived comfortably enough, though not luxuriously. I was teaching at a small girls' school when the influenza came through last winter. The familiar pain constricted her chest. It took my parents within days of each other. My sister, Margaret, lingered longer. She trailed off, remembering the weeks of nursing, the desperate hope, the final devastating loss. I'm sorry, Colton said quietly. Losing family that way, it leaves a hole nothing can fill. The understanding in his voice made her glance at him. You speak from experience, he nodded. Lost my parents to typhoid when I was 16, had a younger brother who died at Gettysburg, so much loss between them. Perhaps that was something they shared, an understanding of grief that words couldn't capture. The afternoon wore on, the rhythmic sway of the wagon and the endless prairie having an almost hypnotic effect. Daisy found herself drowsing until Colton's voice brought her alert. There it is, he said, pointing toward the western horizon. Vaughn Ranch. Daisy followed his gaze. In the distance, she could make out a cluster of buildings nestled in a shallow valley where 2 creeks converged. As they drew closer, details emerged: a substantial log house with a stone chimney, a large barn, corrals, and several outbuildings. A vegetable garden was visible to one side of the house and an orchard of young trees to the other. It's larger than I expected, she admitted. Pride colored Colton's voice. Built the house myself with some help from neighbors, started with just one room, added on as I could afford it. 6 rooms now, including a proper kitchen. They crossed a sturdy wooden bridge over the creek, and as they approached the house, Daisy noticed smaller details: curtains at the windows, a covered porch with a rocking chair, flower beds that needed tending. Someone, Colton himself, had tried to make this place hospitable. A man emerged from the barn as they pulled up, followed by a gangly boy of about 14. "That's Martin Hollies," Colton explained. "My foreman and his son Timothy, they've been looking after things while I was gone." Martin approached the wagon, his weathered face breaking into a smile. "Welcome back, boss. Madam," he added, touching his hat respectfully to Daisy. "Martin, this is my wife, Daisy," Colton said, the words still sounding new and strange. "We were married this morning in town. Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Vaughn," Martin said, his surprise evident despite his politeness. "Timothy and I spruced up the house best we could, but it'll be glad for a woman's touch." "Thank you," Daisy replied, uncertain how to respond to being referred to as the boss's wife, when just days ago she had been Miss Kennedy, schoolteacher from Boston. Timothy helped unload her trunk while Colton and Martin spoke quietly about ranch business. Daisy stood somewhat awkwardly, taking in what was now her home. It was rugged but well built, with careful attention to practical details. The surrounding land was rich with grass, perfect for cattle, and the creeks ensured water even in dry seasons. "Let me show you inside," Colton said, returning to her side. Martin and Timothy tactfully departed toward the bunkhouse, leaving the newlyweds alone. The interior of the house was neat but Spartan: functional furniture, plain walls, minimal decoration. The main room served as both parlor and dining room, with a large fireplace providing warmth. Off this room were doors leading to what Colton identified as his office, the kitchen, and a hallway to the bedrooms. "Our room is at the end of the hall," he said, gesturing but not leading her there yet. "There's a spare room that could be whatever you want to make it, a sewing room perhaps, or—" He trailed off, but the implication was clear: someday a nursery. Daisy moved to the kitchen, which was surprisingly well equipped with a cast iron stove, a pump for water, built-in cabinets, and a large work table. Someone, Martin's wife perhaps, had left a loaf of bread and a crock of butter on the table, along with a note welcoming Mrs. Vaughn to her new home. "It's a good house," she said finally, turning to face Colton. "You've built something substantial here." "Been working toward it for 8 years, he replied, "but a house isn't a home without." He stopped, perhaps feeling he was saying too much too soon. "Without a woman's touch," Daisy supplied with a slight smile. "Without life in it," he corrected. "Gets too quiet with just a man and his thoughts." The honesty of the statement disarmed her. This was the real reason he had advertised for a wife, not just for cooking and cleaning, or even for children, but for companionship. For someone to break the silence of the prairie evenings. "Well," she said practically, "I should start preparing supper. You must be hungry after our journey." "I could help," Colton offered, surprising her. "I'm not much of a cook, but I can follow directions." So began their first evening, as husband and wife, a simple meal prepared together, eaten at the wooden table by lamplight, conversation that started and stopped as they navigated the unfamiliarity between them. It was nothing like the romantic notions Daisy had once harbored, yet there was something satisfying in its very ordinariness. Later, as the prairie darkness settled around the house, the moment Daisy had both anticipated and dreaded arrived. Colton showed her to the bedroom, their bedroom, with an awkwardness that matched her own. "I had Martin's wife help me get some things I thought you might need," he said, gesturing to a dressing table with a mirror, a chest for her clothes, and even a screen in one corner for privacy. The bed was large, with a quilt that showed skilled needlework. "It's very nice," Daisy said, her voice higher than usual. Colton stood in the doorway, hesitating. "Daisy, I want you to know something. I meant what I said about this being a partnership. I won't. That is, I don't expect." He took a breath. "There's no rush for certain aspects of marriage. We hardly know each other." Relief and something like disappointment mingled in her chest. "Thank you," she said quietly. "For understanding," he nodded. "I'll sleep in the spare room tonight, give you time to settle in." After he left, Daisy sat on the edge of the bed, emotions tumbling through her. She had married a stranger, moved to a wild place far from everything familiar, and now faced building a life with a man she was only beginning to know. Yet Colton had shown consideration that many men in his position wouldn't have. Perhaps, she thought as she prepared for bed, there was hope for them after all. The first week of marriage was a dance of mutual discovery and adjustment. Daisy learned the rhythms of ranch life early mornings, the patterns of chores, the isolation that was both peaceful and daunting. Colton continued to sleep in the spare room, though they shared meals and increasingly comfortable conversation. She took over the running of the household, finding satisfaction in bringing order and comfort to the spaces. The kitchen became her domain, filled with the aromas of bread baking and stews simmering. She planted flowers along the front path and hung proper curtains in all the windows. Colton watched these transformations with quiet appreciation, occasionally offering to help but mostly giving her freedom to make the house her own. In the evenings, they would sit on the porch, watching the sunset paint the prairie in golds and purples while he told her about the cattle, the land. The neighbors scattered miles apart. On the 8th day, as Daisy was hanging laundry in the yard, she heard hoofbeats approaching. A woman about her own age rode up on a sturdy mare, dressed in a practical riding skirt and jacket. "You must be Mrs. Vaughn," the woman called cheerfully, dismounting. "I'm Elizabeth Cooper. My husband, Thomas, has the spread to the north. We're your closest neighbors." Daisy welcomed the unexpected visitor with genuine pleasure. Elizabeth proved to be friendly and forthright, full of useful information about frontier life and the small community of ranchers and farmers in the area. "We have a social at the schoolhouse once a month," Elizabeth explained over coffee at the kitchen table. "You must come to the next one. Everyone's curious about Colton's bride." "Curious?" Daisy echoed. Elizabeth smiled. "Colton's been something of a mystery since he settled here. Keeps to himself mostly, though he's always willing to help a neighbor in need. When word got out he'd sent for a bride, well," she shrugged, "it was the most exciting news in months." "I'm afraid we'll disappoint anyone expecting drama," Daisy said, though she wondered if their unconventional beginning her waiting alone for 3 days was already the subject of local gossip. "Oh, I don't know," Elizabeth said with a knowing look. "A handsome rancher and his eastern bride. Sounds like the start of a good story to me." After Elizabeth left, promising to return soon with her husband, Daisy found herself considering the woman's words. Was Colton considered handsome? Objectively, she supposed he was strong features, expressive eyes, a certain dignity in his bearing. But she had been so focused on the practical aspects of their arrangement that she had scarcely allowed herself to think of him in those terms. That evening, as they sat down to supper, Daisy mentioned Elizabeth's visit. "The Coopers are good people," Colton said. "Thomas helped me raise the barn when I first started out." Elizabeth mentioned a social at the schoolhouse. She said we should attend. Colton looked uncomfortable. "I'm not one for gatherings, because of the war." Daisy asked impulsively, then immediately regretted it when his expression closed. "What makes you say that?" he asked carefully. "Just something in how you talk or don't talk about that time, as if it's still with you." He was silent so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, he said, "Some things leave marks you can't see. Being in crowds, unexpected noises, they can bring it all back." The admission seemed to cost him something. Daisy reached across the table, hesitantly placing her hand over his. It was the first time she had touched him voluntarily since their wedding. "We don't have to go," she said softly, his hand turned, large fingers enfolding hers. "No, you should meet people, make friends, I'll manage. We'll go together," she decided. "And if it becomes too much, we'll leave together." The look he gave her then was complex gratitude, surprise, and something warmer that made her cheeks flush. That night, Colton paused at her bedroom door. "Good night, Daisy," he said, as he had every night since their arrival. "Good night, Colton." She hesitated, then added, "You don't have to keep sleeping in the spare room. This is your bed, too." The invitation hung between them, tentative but sincere. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice low. "Yes," she said simply. "I'm your wife." He joined her that night, keeping carefully to his side of the bed, but his presence, the sound of his breathing, the warmth of him nearby changed something fundamental between them. It was a small step, but an important one. The days fell into a pattern as May gave way to June. Daisy adjusted to ranch life more easily than she had expected, finding satisfaction in the direct relationship between work and results. She learned to ride the gentle mare Colton provided, explored the boundaries of their property, and even helped with some of the lighter ranch work when extra hands were needed. Colton, for his part, began to share more of himself. He taught her about the cattle, explaining breeding lines and grazing patterns with evident passion. In the evenings, he sometimes read aloud from one of the books in his small but carefully chosen library, revealing an educated mind behind his frontier exterior. The social at the schoolhouse proved less daunting than anticipated. The community welcomed Daisy warmly, and though Colton remained reserved, he stayed by her side throughout the evening, introducing her with quiet pride as "my wife." On their way home under a sky brilliant with stars, he confessed, "It was easier than I expected, having you there." "I'm glad," she replied, touched by his honesty. That night when they retired, Colton hesitantly reached for her in the darkness. "Daisy," he whispered, a question in his voice. She answered by moving into his arms, their kiss deepening from tentative to certain. As husband and wife truly became one, Daisy discovered that physical love could indeed follow a marriage arranged on paper, when hearts were willing to take the risk. Afterward, lying in the circle of his arms, she asked the question that had lingered since their first meeting. "Why did you decide to advertise for a wife? The truth." Colton was quiet for a moment, his hand absently stroking her hair. "After the war, I couldn't seem to connect with people. Everything felt distant, unreal. Building the ranch gave me purpose, but at night the emptiness would close in." He paused. "I thought having a wife might help anchor me to the world again. It was selfish, perhaps." "Not selfish," Daisy murmured. "Human." He continued, his voice low in the darkness. "When I saw your letter among the responses, something about your words felt genuine. You didn't write about finding adventure or escaping to an exotic frontier. You wrote about building something meaningful, about partnership." "And now?" she asked. "Has having a wife helped?" His arms tightened around her. "Having you has. I don't think just any wife would have done." The admission warmed her more than any passionate declaration might have. It was honest, unadorned like the man himself. Summer unfolded across the prairie in waves of green, giving way to gold as the grasses matured. Daisy's garden thrived, providing fresh vegetables for their table. She made friends with other ranch wives, learning the practical skills of frontier living, preserving food, basic veterinary care for the animals, how to shoot the rifle Colton insisted she keep nearby when he was away from the house. Life wasn't without challenges. A summer storm destroyed part of the barn roof, requiring days of repairs. One of their best milk cows died unexpectedly, reducing both their dairy supply and their breeding stock. And sometimes, Colton would wake in the night, gripped by memories of the war that left him shaking and distant until dawn. Through it all, they grew closer, not with the dramatic passion of romantic tales, but with a steady deepening of trust and affection. Colton began to smile more, to laugh at Daisy's dry observations about frontier life. Daisy found herself watching for his return when he was away working the far pastures, anticipating the moment when his tall figure would appear on the horizon. In late July, they attended a wedding in the nearby town of Liberty, the daughter of the general store owner marrying a young farmer. During the celebration, Colton actually danced with Daisy, his natural grace surprising her. "You never mentioned you could dance," she teased as he guided her through a waltz. "Didn't think it mattered much on a cattle ranch," he replied with a smile that reached his eyes. "What else don't I know about you, Colton Vaughn?" The question was playful, but his answer was serious. Less and less every day, I hope. On the way home, they stopped at a creek crossing to water the horses. The summer twilight painted the landscape in soft purples and blues, crickets creating a symphony in the tall grass. Colton helped Daisy down from the wagon, but instead of releasing her, he kept his hands at her waist. "I never thought I'd feel this way again," he said quietly. "What way?" she asked, though something in his expression made her heart beat faster, like the future matters, like I matter. He touched her cheek gently. "I know this wasn't how you imagined finding a husband waiting alone for days, then marrying a scarred rancher who couldn't even meet you on time." "Colton, let me finish," he said gently. "I need to say this. When I realized I wouldn't make it to St. Joe on time, I was certain you'd be gone by the time I arrived, or if you were still there, you'd refuse to come with me. I wouldn't have blamed you. Yet here I am," Daisy said softly. "Here you are. Making a home out of a house, bringing life back into days that had no meaning beyond work." His voice roughened. "I didn't know it was possible to start feeling this way so quickly." "What way?" she asked again, needing to hear him say it. His eyes held hers. "Like I'm falling in love with my wife." The words hung in the summer air, honest and unadorned. "I think," Daisy said carefully, "that your wife might be falling in love with you too." The kiss they shared then was different from those that had come before, not tentative, not merely passionate, but imbued with the recognition of something precious growing between them. As summer gave way to autumn, the ranch demanded all their energy. The cattle needed to be driven to market, a 2-week absence for Colton that Daisy endured with a mixture of pride in his work and longing for his return. When he came back, pockets heavy with the proceeds of the sale, they celebrated with a small luxury real coffee, not the chicory blend they usually drank, and store-bought candy. "I have something else," Colton said that evening, producing a small package. "Saw it in the Mercantile in Kansas City and thought of you." Inside was a silver locket, simple but elegant. Daisy opened it to find it empty. "I thought you might want to put a small portrait in it someday," Colton explained, "when we have time to go to a photographer." "It's beautiful," she said, genuinely touched. It was her first piece of jewelry besides her wedding ring, and the fact that he had thought of her while conducting his business warmed her deeply. That night, as autumn wind rattled the windows, they lay close beneath the quilts, talking of plans for the coming winter and beyond. "I've been thinking," Colton said, his voice rumbling in his chest where Daisy's head rested. "The herd did well this year. We could add onto the house come spring. Perhaps another bedroom." The implication was clear. Daisy smiled in the darkness. "That seems wise planning." His hand found hers. "Are you happy here, Daisy?" "Truly, I am," she answered without hesitation. "It's not the life I imagined as a girl, but it's become the life I want. Even with a husband who was 3 days late to your first meeting." There was a hint of teasing in his voice now, a sign of how far they had come. "Especially with him," she replied, turning to kiss him. "It seems I have a fondness for cattlemen with poor timekeeping but excellent apologetic skills." Winter descended on the prairie with a vengeance that year. November brought the first blizzard, confining them to the house for 3 days while wind howled around the eaves and snow drifted against the doors. Colton ventured out only to tend to essential chores, returning with frost in his beard and gratitude for the warm home awaiting him. They spent the long evenings by the fire, reading aloud, playing checkers, and talking of their pasts. Daisy shared stories of her childhood in Boston, the sister she had lost, the dreams she had harbored of becoming a writer someday. Colton, gradually opening the closed doors of his history, told her of his family's small farm in Pennsylvania, his brother's talent for music, the horrors he had witnessed during the war that still haunted his sleep. "I saw men I'd known since childhood die in ways no one should die," he confessed one night, staring into the flames. "After a while, you start to wonder why you were spared when better men weren't. You were spared to build this place," Daisy said, taking his hand. "To make a life that honors their memory by being fully lived." He looked at her with something like wonder. "How did you get so wise?" "Not wisdom," she corrected. "Just the perspective of someone who loves you and sees your worth." The words slipped out naturally, the first time either had directly spoken of love. Colton's expression softened, the haunted look receding. "I love you too," he said simply. "More than I knew was possible." December brought Christmas, their first holiday as husband and wife. They exchanged modest gifts, a new hat for Colton to replace his weathered one, books for Daisy ordered specially from St. Louis. Martin and Timothy joined them for Christmas dinner, along with the Coopers and their children, filling the house with laughter and conversation. As they prepared for bed that night, Daisy felt a wave of contentment. The house was now truly a home, filled with memories and meaning. The woman who had waited alone at the train station seemed a distant figure, someone she had once been but no longer was. "What are you thinking?" Colton asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. "That sometimes the best journeys don't lead where we expected," she replied. 8 months ago, I was a school teacher in Boston with no family and few prospects. Now I'm a rancher's wife in Missouri with a home and a community and... She placed his hand on her abdomen, still flat but harboring a secret she had confirmed just days before, "and the beginning of our family." Colton stared at her, comprehension dawning slowly. "Daisy, are you saying?" She nodded, smiling through sudden tears. "Around June, the doctor thinks." His expression transformed from shock to joy. He gathered her in his arms, holding her as if she were made of precious glass. "A baby," he whispered against her hair. "Our child, are you pleased?" she asked, though his reaction left little doubt. Pleased doesn't begin to describe it. He drew back to look at her. "Are you well? Do you need anything? Should I ride for the doctor?" Daisy laughed at his sudden concern. "I'm perfectly fine. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time, you know. Not my wife," he said seriously, "not carrying my child." The fierce protectiveness in his voice touched her deeply. This man, who had faced the horrors of war and the hardships of frontier life, was undone by the thought of her carrying their baby. "I promise to tell you if I need anything," she assured him. "For now, all I need is you." That promise was tested in the months that followed. January brought another blizzard, this one lasting nearly a week. February saw Daisy battling morning sickness while trying to maintain the household. March brought flooding that threatened the lower pastures and required all hands to move cattle to higher ground. Through it all, Colton was steady as bedrock, adapting his work to be closer to home, ensuring Daisy had help when needed, treating her with a tenderness that sometimes made her laugh. "I'm with child, not made of china," she protested one evening when he insisted on carrying her to bed after she mentioned her back ached. "Humor me," he replied, kissing her forehead. "I've never been a father to be before." Spring arrived with a riot of wildflowers across the prairie and new calves in the pastures. Daisy's body changed with the season, her slender form softening and rounding as their child grew within her. Colton watched these changes with fascination and reverence, his hand often resting on the swell of her belly to feel the baby's movements. In May, on the anniversary of their wedding, Colton surprised Daisy by taking her to St. Joe for 2 days. He had arranged for Martin to oversee the ranch and booked rooms at the Grand Hotel, the same place they had stayed when they first arrived. "It's not Boston," he acknowledged as they walked along the more developed streets of the growing town. "But I thought you might enjoy a change of scenery before the baby comes." Daisy, now in her 8th month and feeling ungainly, appreciated the gesture more than he knew. They visited shops, bought supplies they couldn't get locally, and even had their photograph taken at a studio, Colton insisting on paying for multiple copies for the locket and to send to friends. On their last evening, after a dinner more elaborate than anything available at the ranch, they sat in the small hotel garden. Twilight softened the edges of buildings, and somewhere nearby, someone played a violin. "A year ago today, you were waiting at that train station," Colton said, his hand warm around hers. "And you were fighting your way through a washed-out canyon to reach me," she added. He nodded. "I was so certain you'd be gone. Or that you'd take one look at me and decide you'd made a terrible mistake." "I did consider it," Daisy admitted with a small smile, "especially during those 3 days of waiting, but something told me to stay." "Thank God you listened," he said fervently. "What would you have done if I hadn't been there?" she asked, curious. Colton was quiet for a moment. "Gone back to the ranch, I suppose, tried to make peace with spending my life alone." He looked at her, his eyes serious in the gathering darkness. "But I would have missed something I didn't even know I needed until I found it." "And what's that?" she asked softly. "You," he said simply. "Not just a wife, but you, Daisy Kennedy Vaughn, with your strength and your kindness and the way you see the good in everything." Tears pricked at her eyes, pregnancy making her emotions closer to the surface than usual. "I think we found what we both needed," she said, her free hand resting on her rounded belly, "a place to belong." On a warm June evening, after a labor that tested every ounce of Daisy's strength and left Colton pacing outside their bedroom door like a caged lion, William Martin Vaughn entered the world with a lusty cry that echoed through the ranch house. "A son," Elizabeth Cooper announced, emerging from the bedroom where she had assisted the doctor. Healthy as a horse and loud as a foghorn, Colton, who had faced Confederate charges and flash floods without flinching, found his knees suddenly weak. And Daisy. "Tired but well," Elizabeth assured him. "She's asking for you." He entered the bedroom cautiously, as if afraid too much noise might break the spell of the miracle that had occurred. Daisy lay propped against pillows, her face pale but radiant, a small bundle cradled in her arms. "Come meet your son," she said, her voice weary but filled with wonder. Colton approached the bed, perching carefully beside her. The baby's face was red and wrinkled, his head covered with dark fuzz that promised to be the same shade as his father's. "He's perfect," Colton whispered, one large finger gently touching the tiny hand. The baby's fingers unfurled and then closed around his father's in a grip surprisingly strong for one so small. "He has your determination," Daisy said with a soft laugh, "already holding on tight to what he wants." "William," Colton tested the name they had chosen if the baby was a boy, after Daisy's father. "Welcome to the world, son." Looking at his wife and child, Colton felt a completeness he had never experienced before, as if a circle had been closed, a promise fulfilled. From the devastation of war to the hope of this moment, his life had traveled a path he could never have imagined. "Thank you," he said to Daisy, his voice rough with emotion. "For what?" she asked, her eyes lifting from the baby to meet his. "For waiting those 3 days, for coming west. For believing we could build something real together. Even though you were late," she teased gently, their private joke now a cherished part of their history. "Especially because I was late," he replied, leaning forward to kiss her forehead. "It gave me the chance to begin our story with an apology and a promise that I would never take you for granted." "I think you've kept that promise," Daisy murmured, leaning against his shoulder as they both gazed at their son. "And given me far more than I ever expected when I answered your advertisement." The years that followed brought changes to the Vaughn ranch. Another son, James, born 2 years after William. A daughter, Margaret, who arrived 3 years later with her mother's light brown hair and her father's storm gray eyes. The house expanded to accommodate the growing family, and the cattle operation prospered under Colton's careful management. Daisy found unexpected fulfillment not only as wife and mother, but as a contributor to the local newspaper, writing articles about frontier life that eventually caught the attention of publishers back east. Her small volume of essays, Letters from the Prairie, brought her a modest fame and the satisfaction of pursuing the writing dreams she had once set aside. Colton watched his family grow with a sense of wonder that never diminished. The nightmares of war receded over time, replaced by the peaceful rhythms of ranch life and the joyful chaos of children. His hair turned increasingly silver, but his back remained straight, his hands strong as he taught his sons to ride and his daughter to identify the wildflowers that carpeted the prairie each spring. On a golden autumn afternoon 15 years after their wedding, Daisy found Colton on the porch, watching William, now a lanky teenager who resembled his father more each day, work with a young horse in the corral. "He has your way with animals," she observed, settling beside him on the bench they had built together years before. "And your stubbornness," Colton replied with a smile, taking her hand in his. Time had added lines to both their faces, but the gesture remained as natural as breathing. "I prefer to call it determination," Daisy corrected primly, making him chuckle. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sunset paint the prairie in shades of amber and rose. From inside the house came the sound of James practicing his violin and Margaret singing along, their voices carrying through the open windows. "You ever regret it?" Colton asked suddenly. "Coming west, marrying a stranger, building a life so different from what you knew?" Daisy looked at him in surprise. "After 15 years, you still wonder?" He shrugged. "Sometimes I think about that young woman waiting at the train station, how much she was risking on a man who couldn't even arrive on time." "That young woman made the best decision of her life," Daisy said firmly, squeezing his hand. "Even with the hardships, even with the uncertainties, I found more here than I ever dreamed possible." "As did I," Colton acknowledged. "Who would have thought that being 3 days late would lead to all of this?" "Perhaps it was exactly as it should have been," Daisy suggested. "Those 3 days gave me time to consider what I truly wanted, to decide that whatever had delayed you, I would at least hear your explanation before turning away." "And my explanation wasn't even very good," Colton recalled with a self-deprecating smile. "I'm sorry I'm late for you hardly covers a 3-day wait. But it was honest," Daisy pointed out, "like everything that's followed." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "We've built a good life, Colton Vaughn." "The best life," he agreed, his arm going around her shoulders as they watched the sun sink below the horizon. Marking the end of another day in the home they had created together, a home founded on a delayed meeting, an honest apology, and the courage to begin a journey with a stranger who, over time, had become the person they knew and loved best in all the world.